Hi everybody, I'm Brian Lang. I am one of the pilots for the National WASP World War II Museum, which is based out of Sweetwater, Texas. We're here this weekend at their homecoming event, which is held every April in Sweetwater. It used to be a lot of the ladies would come back and spend time here at the airport and get to see each other again. At this point, it's a lot of their families, and there's a lot of families here, and they're having their first ever air show here in 2024 for this event. So today we're going to do a walk around of the Vultee BT-13 that's owned by the WASP Museum here in Sweetwater, and we'll just dive right on into it. So we'll start with the engine compartment. So up here is where the oil fill point is. It holds 10 gallons of oil in the tank plus a little bit in the engine. So when we want to take off, we want to be above 8 and above 9 if we're going to go on a cross country. This air scoop here is for the carburetor piece. If you look down on the inside, you can see the air filter, which then ducts into the carburetor, and then that blows into the engine on the intake side. Since the oil is so far forward, you have to have a step to kind of get to it. So this step right here is where you can put your foot, and we'll demonstrate it when we get up on the airplane, of kind of how you lean forward to get to the oil piece. Also up here is the inertia starter with the hand crank, which we have in the back baggage compartment, but you would put the rod system in here and it gauges to the original inertia starter, which this airplane still has. And we'll talk about that system once we get into the cockpit of how you energize and then engage and mesh the starter system. But that's where the hand crank would be to manually crank the system up. As you move to the bottom of the front accessory cowl pieces, this bottom scoop goes into the oil cooler. So in the cockpit, I have a lever that will turn shutters over the oil cooler system to allow more or less air to come across the oil cooler. In the hot Texas, we very rarely do anything other than full open, just to get as much air through the system as possible. Once you come down here, you see a lot of oil drain vents. So these are just overflow valves from the engine and overflow from the case and overpressure tubes. So if something happens, you put too much oil in the oil tank, it's going to flow out, and instead of just coming into the fuselage, it's going to vent out through the bottom tubes. So as we move forward, this airplane is a little bit different than what you'd see of something of this size. So it has a 2-speed propeller on the Pratt 985, which is 450 horsepower. So the 2-stage propeller, unlike your constant speed, does it's high or low pitch. So instead of setting an RPM and the airplane adjusts and maintains your RPM setting, this one is high or low. So it'd be just like flying a fixed pitch propeller. I can just change it to 2 different pieces. So how that is actuated is through this rod right here. So instead of having a propeller governor on the back of the engine, this one has a rod that is connected to the propeller control in the front cockpit, which we'll show you, and it just moves this rod back and forth. So this airplane on takeoff will make 2,450 RPM. It's very loud, it will rattle windows, but when you pull the propeller control back, excuse me, it goes to about 1,900 RPM. And that change alone, when you're giving a ride to somebody, that's something I always like to brief and talk about beforehand, because the 500, 600 RPM shift in the change of what the airplane does can kind of unsettle some people, especially if you're not expecting it. So what I'll typically do is brief it on the ground, we'll get up to cruise altitude, and I'll say, hey, the propeller's about to change. I'm going to change it in 3, 2, 1, and then I'll pull the propeller control. That way they know exactly what's happening, and I've learned that telling people what's going to happen with the airplane really just eases the ride and makes it go a lot smoother and a little bit less stressful. So with the radial engine, we'll let the PT take off here if you want to snag that. With the radial engine, it's air-cooled. So unlike some of the fighters of World War II that had liquid-cooled engines, the radials are all air-cooled. So what happens is it comes across the cylinders, and these are all cast cylinders. It goes into these fins, and you can see these black baffling pieces behind it. That forces the air to go around the cylinders in kind of a pressure zone. So that's how we cool the cylinders. The front spark plugs are cooled just by the open air pieces. But if you look through the systems and the back mag pieces, there are places, so this is like a mag coolant system for the back. So this ducts air into the back to put air onto the back of the magnetos. And it just helps keep all the pieces of the engine cool, and that's how the air system works. Unfortunately, with radials, they do have a little bit more of a drag coefficient. So if you do lose the engine, your glide's not going to be as good as it would be with something that's going to be fully cowed up. But it sounds cool and it looks cool, so it's all a win there. So as we move along to this other side, it has an exhaust system. So it has 9 cylinders to the 450 horsepower engine. They are all ducted to one exhaust piece. So it sounds nice and vibrant, but the cylinders don't all hit to the exit at the same time. So as it fires, 2, 4, 6, 8, 1, 3, 5 through the order, the pressures are a little bit different, and so it's not always a perfect smooth sound. This piece over it is the heater for the cockpit. So this is it's the air intake, and it pulls hot air, and if you pull one of the levers in the cockpit, which we'll show you, that's how you get hot air into the cockpit. So moving through the airplane, the next big piece is the landing gear. So unlike other trainers of World War II, namely the Texans, these airplanes have very wide landing gear, and they're actually pigeon-toed in about 1 degree. So they quickly got a reputation of being a very docile airplane on the ground, very hard to ground loop, and which led to some people doing some not smart things with the airplane, and then it reminded them that it is still a tailwheel airplane. It will still ground loop, but it does have some built-in features from Vultee that make it want to track straight and be a good handling airplane on the ground, as long as you treat it nice. Down through the system, so you have your standard strut piece. The toe links are down here, and then all the brake hoses are down here through the oleos. So how the gear system works is they're serviced with 5606 hydraulic fluid, which is what this number is here. It's a red fluid. The strut's all the way compressed. You put that in there, and that's kind of the absorbent piece through the filters effectively in the gear. And then you top it off with nitrogen to get the strut to lift up, and that gives it some compression. So as we move through the airplane, we have the landing light systems. Most of the airplane is metal. I'll show you the fabric control surfaces as we go across it. This airplane is not painted. She's polished aluminum, which does take a lot of love from our volunteers and other pilots to keep her looking nice and shiny. The straight metal will corrode a little bit and just kind of give it a little bit of a dull finish. So to keep it nice and shiny, it does get a yearly polish at least. So one of the things we'll point out on this airplane is it has the original World War II navigation light systems. So unlike a lot of new airplanes and airplanes that have been upgraded where the nav lights are on the side pieces of the wingtips for better visibility, they have one on the top and one on the bottom. So this is the original system straight out of the factory. The tail's the same way, and so is the other wing, and we'll point to those. It's just a little bit different as we move through. So coming to the ailerons, this is a fabric control surface piece, and it has a boost tab, which is here in the middle. So the boost tab moves with the aileron back and forth. It is not controllable from the cockpit, but it is adjustable on the ground. So this just helps the airplane stay balanced and coordinated in the turns, and provides a little bit of positive input as you go through. So one of the noticeable characteristics of the BT-13 is the flap system. It has 60 degrees of flaps at full flaps, and you can see that they come all the way down. They are fabric covered, and they actually come from the center section and cross over to the outboard wing panel, and you can see the split in the flaps is for how far out they go. So our normal flap configuration is 40 degrees for landing and 20 degrees maximum for takeoff. If you want to land with less flaps, you always can. 60 degrees of flaps actually puts a little bit of stress on the back spar, and we'll get in and leads to part of the fuel tank weepage of what the BT-13 has with the wet wing, which we'll talk about now because we're at the fuel tanks. So the wet wing is not an actual physical fuel tank. So the airplane's wing is riveted up and it's sealed together similar to a Mooney, and it forms the fuel tank over a few bays. So this airplane holds 60 gallons of fuel on each side. The right tank is the reserve. So there's 2 settings. So you have a 17-gallon reserve standoff pipe. Typically we just fly off a reserve because it's the full tank, or the left tank, which is a full tank. Flying off the standpipe is just not something that we try to do. It prevents confusion going back and forth. But 60 gallons of gas on this airplane is an incredible range. So flying at 135 miles an hour indicated airspeed, we're going to burn probably 22 gallons of gas an hour. So this airplane has a very easy 5-hour range. If any of you have ever flown 5 hours in one shot, you'll know the seat gets a little bit uncomfortable about hour 3. So a lot of BT pilots will have a 3.5 to 4 hour range. My longest flight in this airplane was 3.7 hours. I'm the king of headwinds. And that was from Houston, Ellington to Sweetwater last October 2023 after the Wings Over Houston Air Show. So as you come into the flap system here, you'll notice that it kind of indents into the grip, into the wing walk. So when the airplane's parked, the flaps are always going to be in a down configuration for protection of the airplane. When the flaps are down, you can't step on them. So really what it is it's just help making sure no one can put their foot through the flat piece as we show people the airplane. Part of the WASP museum here is to just show the airplanes and show what the women did and what the women would have flown. So when we go to air shows, we like to put people up on the wing, and we'll typically do 500 to 600 people in air show, pull them up on the wing, show them all the pieces, talk to the kids, let them get up there, take pictures, and really show what the airplanes are, and it's part of why the airplane's there. So as we move through the airplane, as you'll see, it's all metal, and then we get to the tail pieces. So we come in here, the lift point, to lift this airplane, you can put a bar right through that hole and it will connect to the other side, and then people can stand on each side and lift the airplane up. It's also one of the tie down points if you put a rope through it to tie down the tail piece. The jack point for the tail wheel is at the very bottom of the airplane down there, and it's just that straight nub, and you put that right on the jack and lift it up. As we move back to the tail wheel system, the airplane has a full cast ring tail wheel, but it does not have a pilot lock or unlock control system. It actually goes into detents, and it's steerable with the rudder pedals up to a certain point. Once you get to that point, if you want to keep going, just tap the brake and it's going to pop it right through the detent, and then you're in the full caster piece of the tail wheel. Moving around to the back of the airplane, to the elevators and rudder controls, they're also fabric, and you're going to see that they have the actual trim control pieces. So unlike the ailerons with the boost tabs, these are full trim pieces, and I have trim wheels in the cockpit that will allow for me to move these and modify these in flight to keep the airplane straight and level. So one of the things with the BT is the original stingers, which is this piece right here, are very rare and hard to come find, and this airplane has one. So a lot of them have been cut off right here to modify the airplane to take the new navigation light system. But as we noted with the wings, the old nav light system actually has it up on each side of the tail. One reason the FAA kind of went away from this is it's harder to tell at night what angle that airplane's at, because you can see if the airplane's kind of in a turn, you can see two red and a green, but no white, or if it's straight, you can see a green and a white, and it's at that point you might think the airplane's traveling away from you, but when it wouldn't be. So as we come around the piece, you can see the shock fill strut. So the tail wheel, just like the main gear, has a shock system, and that's how you get in to service the top of the shock with nitrogen if you need to. As we noted before, it's all metal. Once we get up on the wing, Eric will find out how shiny this thing is, and I'm glad he has on sunglasses because she's pretty bright. Coming into the baggage compartment, this airplane has the original baggage, or a replica, but it's a canvas baggage compartment. So it's this piece, it's on snaps and zips, but inside we just keep some oil, some rags, just some basic tools to get up to the oil system and things like that. This is the original hand crank for the airplane. So this is what engages into the starter systems, and you have the extension to get it actually all the way in there. But that's how you would manually energize the starter without the electric system. So as we move around, you can see the flap systems. We've pulled the side panel off for y'all, so you can see a little bit more in that. And we'll get up in the cockpit here in a minute, but I'd like to go and talk about the pitot tube just because it sticks so far out. And a lot of people that fly general aviation, this is different. So the pitot tube sticks so far out to get it out of the wing slipstream and get it into the clean air. The wing is designed more for speed than it is for lift. So the BT-13 has a wicked stall characteristic. So the airplane flies and we cruise about 135. The BT-13s are going to stall between 72 and 75 miles an hour depending on what your configuration is at. But they have a very mean stall. So the airplane will be flying. One of its nicknames is the Volti vibrator because the canopies will just buff it as the airplane gets ready to stall. So some airplanes get a little shake, some airplanes kind of mush. This one just violently bangs around, letting you know you're about to have a bad time. And then the airplane's going to stall. In stall training, when you know it's coming, you're going to lose 600 to 800 feet. Some students will lose 1,000 feet. Experienced BT pilots can probably get that down to 200 to 300 feet, but that's once you know it's coming and you're up there practicing. So this airplane's stall, it's going to drop the wing and it's going to go and it's just going to drop. And that's really not a fun experience. I don't like that. So up into the cockpit, we'll show you how the canopies work. They're a little bit different than other World War II airplanes. So you have the emergency exit handles here. So if you pull this piece up, it'll actually take this center piece out. If you pull this up, and it's one of the airshow egress systems, to pull these two glass pieces out if the canopies get jammed. But how the canopy system works is it's a red lever and a handle inside of the cockpit up here, and you twist it. It works either way, and then it just locks into detent holes down here in the bottom with the rod system. So when you twist it, it picks them up, and you can move it to the next detent. It'll fly with the canopies open or closed, and any canopy configuration in the front or back. The airplane doesn't really care where they're at. On a hot day, we'll typically leave them cracked just because it lets more airflow in through the airplane. As we move up here a little bit, we can look through the back piece. If you want, you can see the original wooden stick in the rear. The rear instrument and cockpit configuration was for the instructor to sit in, so it's going to have everything except for mixture turn off, shut off. It's going to have a lock on the front where you can't pull it all the way back from the rear seat. Other than that, it's going to have most of the same controls. It has brakes in the back, full control systems. That way the instructor could see what exactly the pilot was doing. So as we move up here, we have the original radio systems in the airplane. It has new transponder and radios through a trig system, which are built into the instrument panel. But when the airplane was restored, all of the original radios got put back. So you can see just how much space they actually took up, and then feeds up into the antenna mast system here, which we have rigged up. So I'll hop in here. So as we walk through, we'll go left to right at the very bottom. You may not be able to see it because of the shadows. All the way down there is the left fuel gauge, and it's just a dial gauge that goes 0 to 60. As we work our way up, this is the wobble pump. So instead of an electric fuel pump, you have a wobble pump, and you just move it up and down, and you're going to get fuel pressure as we do it on the fuel pressure gauge. So moving up from that, the flap system is here, and we'll get a video of the flaps being operated so you can see me moving this, but it's 2 degrees a turn. So to take the flaps up is in the clockwise direction, and then on here you can see a little tab that tells me how many degrees down it is. So as we go through that, on this side is the rudder trim on the outside and the elevator trim on the inside. This red handle is for the fuel selector, so if I turn this clockwise, it adjusts the fuel tank select lever. It's just a little bit easier when you're strapped in to have it right where your hand is with the throttles and the flat pieces, instead of trying to lean all the way forward up here to get to it. As we move forward, it's their standard throttle mixture propeller controls. Like I said, it's a 2-speed control, so you have it in high or you have it in low. When the airplane's on the ground, we leave and shut off, we leave it in the low pitch because it pulls the propeller dome back into it, and it keeps dust from getting onto the propeller system. So throttle is a standard throttle. All the way forward is full open, full rich is all the way forward there. So you can see the lock piece here. To pull the mixture back, if I just pulled it, nothing's going to happen. It's going to lock on these grooves. You have to push this front tab in and then pull it back through on a spring system. Moving forward up here, you have the oil shutter system. As I noted before, we have the oil cooler has shutters that go on top, and you can open it and close it. It's off of this piece right here, and then up here is the carburetor heat. This is the fuel tank system. So you have the left tank, which is 60 gallons, the right tank, which is 60 gallons, but the right tank, as I noted before, is broken into reserve, which is 17, and then the right-hand top stub is 43 gallons. Here's your magneto switch. So the original piece used to have the battery here. The battery system is now plugged in down here on this airplane, but this was just, you turn the battery on with the mags there. As you move across, this is the engine start system, right? So you would turn the master on with the starter button here. So you have to push it to engage or energize, and you have to hold it, and you'll hear the engine wind up. And it actually produces a pretty audible whine, and you know you have enough when it levels out. And it's a high pitch and it's a scream. And once it levels out and it's quit getting higher and higher in pitch, you know you're at full speed, and then you push it this way to engage the starter, and then that meshes together. Through here is just all the lights and all the battery systems. Landing lights are here. Cockpit lights up and down as you come through. You have the amp meters here. This is your static pressure source, so you have it on the outside, or the alternate source, which is up underneath the cockpit. Here are our radio and transponder sets. Like I noted, they're trig systems. You have your altimeter, airspeed, turn and bank indicator, cylinder head temperature. The triple gauge is an interesting one. So on the bottom right is fuel pressure, on the bottom left is oil pressure, on the top is oil temperature. This is the RPM gauge. So what you won't notice in this airplane is a manifold pressure gauge. So with the 2-speed propeller, it's going to act just like a fixed pitch propeller. So the manifold pressure really comes into play with a constant speed of knowing where the engine's at, because you can control everything finitely. This one, you're just changing the pitch, so there's no need to have a manifold pressure gauge. You have the clock, the 8-day clock, the suction gauge, and vertical speed. Up here you have the artificial horizon, and the 2 compasses. As you move down here, you have the hot air and cold air push. So you want it pulled for cold air and then pushed in as all the way off. So this would be full cold. You push this one in and pull this one out. That's the hot air that comes off of the exhaust pipe. How the parking brake system here works is you push your feet down on the brake pedals, and then you would engage the parking brake system there. We typically leave it off just because it puts a lot of stress on the master brake cylinders. So part of this airplane, before you turn the engine on, is to pump the brakes up, make sure you have good pressure. The master brake cylinders in the BT-13s are known to have to be recharged 1 or 2 times a year just to maintain good pressure through this airplane's avionics master switch is all the way over here. So one thing that you won't see in a lot of airplanes is a push to dilute. So in cold weather systems, this is actually going to put gasoline into the oil system to kind of dilute to unthicken the oil in really, really cold weather. It's inoperative in this airplane. And then up here is the engine prime. The light square in the middle is a fuel pressure warning. So when we get below about 2 psi of fuel pressure, this light's going to turn on and tell us that we're running a low on fuel pressure. And then over here to the right is all of the original radio sets that would have been in the airplane. So you can see just kind of how complicated the old radio systems used to be. So the flap system is here. You'll see my hand rotating. It's 2 degrees per turn. So to bring the flaps all the way up, it's at 50 degrees right now. It's going to take me probably 25 to 26 turns. And if you'll back up, you can just see kind of how long it takes to get the system to come up. So that's all the way up, and then neutral with the stick. And then to put them back down, that's 40, so that's your landing configuration. And that's full flaps for park. So from the WASP Museum here in Sweetwater, Texas, thank you for joining us for the walk around of the BT-13. Y'all have a good day.